came up with the idea to produce hologram of the face of Christ in iconography and the man of the shroud. She got a score of 110/110 with honor. She wrote in 2013 a book called The Man of the Shroud and the Face of Christ in Art, Across the History of Two Equal Images. She is now attending the Postgraduate School of Sindonic Studies in Rome. Flavia?
Good evening to everybody. I'm really happy of having the opportunity of being here with some of the greatest scholars of the Turin Shroud. I'm also a bit nervous, so if I faint, just pick me up, because it could be a problem. The analysis of the imprint on the Turin Shroud allowed recognizing traces of different kinds of corporal injuries. Some of them fall all over the surface of the body, and scholars identify them with the result of a terrible scourging. The marks of scourging and crucifixion, like the grey part of the wounds visible on the cloth, reinforce the hypothesis of the identification of the man of the shroud with Jesus of Nazareth. The tortures suffered by the man of the shroud can be totally assimilated to the ones that, according to the Gospels, were inflicted on Jesus. Mark and Matthew say that Jesus was flogged. They use the term flagellosas. Luke only talks about a chastisement, paideliusas, while John uses the word emastigosen, coming from the Greek mastix, scourge. The hypothesis of the identification of the tortures suffered by Jesus and the ones of the man of the shroud requires verifying if the marks on the shroud are really compatible with the tortures adopted in the Roman world in the 1st century. This question gave life to many researches, and scholars came to the substantially unanimous conclusion that the man of the shroud was scourged with the Roman flagrum, made of 2 or 3 lashes ending with heavy objects. This interpretation was reached by many scholars, such as Vignon, Barbet, Ricci, Baima Bollone, Zaninotto, Zaghibe, and recently Faccini and Fanti, who supposed that the man of the shroud was scourged with 2 different tools, a Roman flagrum and some flexible rods or rigid leather cords. Many scholars often use a specific word to define the flagrum that would have been used for the man of the shroud, taxillatum. The analysis of this theme could appear to be concluded, since historiography is unanimous. Nevertheless, some new elements seem to appear from the examination of this matter. In fact, a particular datum deduced by the exegesis of these studies is that the word taxillatum is used only starting from the 80s. Before this time, scholars used to talk about a generic Roman flagrum, without any further specification. This unexpected element aroused the curiosity of searching the origin of this term in the original sources, but this research led to an unforeseen answer. Latin sources never talk about flagrum taxillatum. But how does this information reconcile with the hypothesis of the great scholars who analyzed this issue of the shroud? Why do they always talk about an object that sources never mention? And if there is no evidence of an instrument corresponding to the one of which originating the wood marks on the shroud, is it possible to state, however, that the traces on the cloth are compatible to the torture practices of the 1st century Roman world? In order to try to understand if those doubts can be solved, we will try to retrace, through the witness of original sources, some information about Roman scourging, in order to understand if there is any compatibility between the scourging modalities of the Roman period and the traces visible on the Turin Shroud. In the Roman world, many different instruments were used to inflict chastisement through flesh beating. The use of the different tools was determined by the gravity of the crime, but also by the social class of the prisoner and by his nationality. The lowest level of this punishment was carried out in schools against undisciplined students. In this case, it was used an instrument called ferula, which was a thin stick or a flat leather strip. Another instrument which could be used for the domestic punishment was the so-called virga. In case of serious crimes, it could become an instrument of death. It was made of small rods which could be used singularly or joined together. Virgae were also carried by the lictors as symbols of the authority of magistrates, because virgae were used to flog criminals. We have many iconographical witnesses of the virgae used as a symbol of the magistrate's power. Often representations can be found on tombs or coins or even on isolated monuments. According to the analysis of Fanti and Faccini, the man of the shroud could have been beaten with a bundle of virgae. The Romans used often whips made of a unique lash. There are many iconographical witnesses attesting the use of this tool. We can quote, for example, the iconography of Apollo Helios, often represented while he drives horses with a whip. In the Roman time, there was also a widespread use of whips made of several lashes, often represented. We can mention a denarius attributed to the moneyer Titus Dedius. Here we can see a man who is beating another one with a whip made of 3 lashes. A peculiar type of whip made of several lashes was the so-called Spanish cord, quoted by Horace. It was made by several leather straps starting from a handle. According to Faccini and Fanti, the man of the shroud could have been beaten with an instrument like this. We have an interesting witness of this tool from the Roman world. It can be seen on the lid of a sarcophagus found in the cemetery of Praetestatus in Rome, dated to the 3rd century. Here is represented a woman, called Aelia Aphanasia, who is being scourged by another woman. The whip used by the second woman seems of the same type of the one that Faccini and Fanti connected to the scourging of the man of the shroud. Archaeological bibliography considers all the instruments that we have seen up to now as associable to the concept of flagellum. Nevertheless, in the same bibliography can be found a clear differentiation between the flagellum in the strict sense of the word and the flagrum. Even if sometimes these terms are considered as synonymous, from etymological point of view, in fact, flagellum is a diminutive of flagrum, flagrum can be considered a more destructive flagellum. The main difference between the two objects is their destructivity. While the flagellum was a whip made of leather or flexible lashes, the flagrum had blunt endings, which could beat and rip flesh. According to the sources of the 1st centuries, the Romans used a flagrum made of small chains starting from a handle and ending with metal balls. They are quoted, for example, in Prudentius, in the Theodosian Code, and in Zosimus, who talk about plumbum and plumbata. There are not many iconographical witnesses of this tool, which was used mainly to chastise serious crimes and was not suitable for mythical and religious representations. Nevertheless, we have an artistic example of a flagrum ending with knobs on a bas-relief dated to the 2nd century before Christ, preserved at the Naples National Archaeological Museum. On the left, we can see a man who is beating another one with an object with round endings. It was probably a flagrum of the kind mentioned above. So, the existence of the flagrum ending with metal balls, which, according to some scholars, was used to hit the man of the shroud, is witnessed by historical and iconographical sources. Nevertheless, sources never define it with the word taxillatum. So, what does this word refer to? To answer this question, it is necessary to go back to some older sources, which talk about another type of flagrum made of a handle, from which started some lashes provided with animal bones. Plutarch talks about this tool in the work Contra Colotem, where he states that the priests of the goddess Magna Mater were punished with the mastics astragalotes. Plutarch is now referring to rituals of self-flogging which were practiced by the priests of the Syrian divinities Cybele, that was the Magna Mater, and Attis, whose cult was introduced in Rome from Asia Minor in the 3rd century before Christ. Cybele and Attis priests used to flog themselves with a flagrum provided with animal bones, that are the astragals, as it is confirmed also by Athenaeus of Naucratis, who talks about a whip defined astragalotois. The same object is described by Lucian in the work Lucius, where the protagonist is beaten with an astragaloton mastici. Also Julius Pollux, in his Onomasticon, talks about an astragalote whip. In the 3rd century, Apuleius, in his Metamorphoses, clearly describes this object, which he connects to the rituals of the Syrian goddess Atargatis, who was often assimilated to Cybele. Apuleius states that the flagrum used by the priest for self-flogging was multiugis talisovium tesseratum. Shortly after, Apuleius defines this tool pecunis ossibus catenatum. Also, Eustathius of Thessalonica talks about the mastics astragalotas. On a 2nd century bas-relief found at Lanuvio, this torture tool is represented in all its terrible features. Those sources which talk about a whip provided with animal bones seem to recall the flagrum taxillatum often mentioned by the Shroud scholars starting from the 80s. But also in this case, sources never use the exact word taxillatum. So where does this adjective come from? The answer to this question comes from a work published in the 16th century by the philologist and humanist Justus Lipsius. In his work De Cruce, he analyzed the practice of scourging and flogging in the Roman time, and he examined all the sources which talk about the flagrum provided with astragals. Here he translates the passages of the authors mentioning the flagrum in different ways. Plutarch's mastics astragalotes becomes flagri illius taxillati. Athenaeus astragalotois whips become virgis et loris taxillatis. Eustathius mastics astragalotas become flagra talaria, while Apuleius Latin passages become flagro fimbriatum et multiugis talisovium tessalatum and flagrum pecunis ossibus catenatum. So Lipsius freely translates the words referred to the presence of astragals through the various forms of the word taxillatus, but also with talaria and tessalatum. Clearly, he adapted to the various lexical forms the Latin translation of the term astragal, which is talus. It could be translated both as astragal, that is bone, both as game dice. Lipsius considers taxillus, that is small dice, as a diminutive form of talus. Dices in Latin were also called tessere. It was a type of dice slightly different from the talus. From tessera comes the word tesseratus, used by Apuleius and translated by Lipsius with tessalatum. The phonetic resemblance among those words probably led Lipsius to consider them as synonymous, variously inflected. So the word flagrum taxillatum, used by the several Shroud scholars, seems to come from Lipsius' work, which has been translated in the 80s from the famous syntonologist Gino Zaninotto. After this translation, Lipsius' work started circulating in the world of the studies about the Turin Shroud, and as a consequence, the word taxillatum started to be commonly used. For philological accuracy, it would be better to refer to this specific kind of flagrum not with the word taxillatum, which is the result, as we have seen, of a free terminological interpretation, but with the expression provided with astragals, or better, tesseratum. And it seems not exact, neither connecting this tool to the flogging and the scourging of the man of the shroud. This type of flagrum is in fact always connected by sources to customs that were not Romans, but typical of foreign religions. To connect this tool to the use of Romans in the 1st century Palestine does not seem much likely. Furthermore, the marks on the shroud recall a scourge whose lashes end only with two weights, with two knobs, while Cibele and Attis' flagrum was provided with several astragals. Probably the flagrum used to scourge the man of the shroud was a rough object, made of chains or lashes ending with heavy knobs, maybe of the type quoted before, so the plumbum and the plumbata. As we have seen, the use of these tools in the first centuries of the Roman world is witnessed by historical, literary, and iconographical sources. But what about archaeology? Are there any archaeological witnesses of the Roman time confirming the use of whips compatible to the ones used to scourge the man of the shroud? It is necessary to state that a great part of the instruments used to scourge criminals cannot have preserved, since they were made of natural and so perishable materials like leather or wood. For this reason, it will be very unlikely to find specimens of virge, ferule, or Spanish cords. The same applies to the flagrum with astragals, even if it is possible that single parts of it have preserved, like for example the bones. For what concerns flagra made of chains and metal balls, we have some indication about the existence of such kind of tools in some dictionaries of archaeology. We can quote a specimen mentioned in the dictionary of Anthony Rich, dated to 1890, which, according to the author, was found at Herculanum, near Naples, and so was surely dated to the 1st century. This information is reported also in the Dictionary of Greek and Roman Antiquities by Smith, in the Dictionary of Roman and Greek Archaeology by Darenberg and Saglio, and in the Dictionary of Christian Archaeology by Cabrol and Leclerc. In all those cases, the specimens are reproduced with xylographies, as you can see. In the Dictionary of Roman Antiquities, it is said that, beyond the flagra found at Herculanum, some other specimens were found in the Roman catacombs. This information is reported also in the Dictionary of Christian Archaeology, where are provided several illustrations of those torture tools. The information about those specimens was taken back also from many scholars of the Shroud. The shape of the flagrum from Herculanum, such as the ones of the catacombs flagra, seems to be compatible with the scourging signs visible on the sheet. The indications about the existence of flagra connectable with the shroud's marks dated exactly to the 1st century, so the flagrum from Herculanum, or to the 1st centuries of the Christian era, so the flagra from the catacombs, seem to remove every doubt about the possibility that the man of the shroud came under a Roman scourging, not far from the period when Jesus lived. Nevertheless, these dictionaries are very old, and they lack of any indication about the preservation places of the specimens. For this reason, it was necessary to verify if today it is possible to go back to those objects and to understand where they are located. So we got in touch with the main institutions related to the archaeological excavations of Herculanum and Rome. For what concerns the flagrum of Herculanum, the research in the database of the site made by the General Direction for the Cultural Heritage of Campania did not give the expected results. It was not possible to find any evidence of the flagra mentioned in the dictionaries. The same result came from the research in the databases of the Naples Archaeological Museum. Nevertheless, the scholars who made this research underlined the difficulty of finding specimens lacking of an inventory number, even more so because they have been found in the 19th century. The general direction pointed out that probably those objects have been registered under a different nomenclature, or maybe they lay forgotten in some depository, or they have been sold to other museums or private collections. So the research about the flagra from Herculanum did not give the expected results. At this point, the research concentrated on the area of Rome, trying to understand where are preserved today the flagra from the catacombs. For this purpose, we got in touch with the Vatican museums. In this case, the answer was positive. In fact, at the Vatican museums are today preserved 4 objects classified as bronze Roman flagella, inventoried with numbers from 6,564 and 6,567. Then it was possible to go directly to the museums in order to analyze them. The flagrum number 6,566 is made of a long chain ending with other three small chains with finish with round knobs. This is represented in the Dictionary of Christian Archaeology, and it is very similar to another of the four specimens. The object number 6,576 is made of four bronze chains starting from 3 rings and ending with triangle-shaped small objects joined together with a small ring. This is represented in the Dictionary of Christian Archaeology too, and the photographs that you can see were kindly provided by the photographical services of the Vatican museums. Unfortunately, today the museum has got only these 2 black and white reproductions of the flagra. The colored pictures have already been required, and they will be available in some months. None of those flagra are exposed at the museum, but they are all preserved in the depositories. There, they were part of the Christian Museum, which was established in 1757 by Pope Benedict XIV, and they were, in this collection were preserved objects of various places and times. Even if there are no sure indications about the provenance of these flagra, we know that they were exposed in the Christian Museum together with other torture instruments, and they were defined uncus ex aere sive singula ad ex carnificanda corpora sanctissimum martyrum adibita. It confirms their dating to the first centuries of the Christian era and not to the medieval time, and the information of the archaeological dictionaries about their provenance from the catacombs confirms their dating to a period that is not much far from the 1st century. The catacombs, in fact, were used only until the 5th century. It is very interesting, above all, the flagrum number 6,566. The scourge mark, defined by Faccini and Fanti as type 1, which consists in 2 small round marks connected with a little trail, could be generated by an object similar to this, whose extremities are round and connected by a thin piece of bronze. The conclusions are that the analysis of the Roman historical, literary, iconographical, and archaeological sources always concluded that in the Roman world several instruments were used to scourge criminals, and some of them are compatible with the marks visible on the Turin shroud. Nevertheless, for what concerns the shroud, it is not correct to talk about a flagrum taxillatum, since the word taxillatum is a free interpretation of the 16th century humanist Justus Lipsius. The correct word to refer to the flagrum provided with animal bones is flagrum tesseratum, or simply provided with astragals. Furthermore, this type of flagrum cannot be connected to the shroud, since it was not used in the Roman world to punish criminals, but only in religious contexts external to the Roman one. Probably the flagrum used to hit the man of the shroud was a rough object, made of lashes or chains ending with knobs, that could have been made of metal, wood, or any other material. The existence of this type of flagrum in the first centuries of the Christian era is witnessed by historical and iconographical sources, but above all by archaeology. At the Vatican museums, as we have seen, are preserved 4 specimens of flagra ending with metal knobs. They are classified as Roman flagella, and they had already been mentioned in the archaeological literature, which states that they were found in the Roman catacombs. Their existence confirms the reliability of the recovery in Herculanum of flagra ending with heavy terminations. As a consequence, it confirms the possibility that the man of the shroud was scourged with the Roman flagrum, compatible with those used in the 1st century Roman world. Certainly, this cannot be considered as the definitive proof that the man of the shroud is Jesus. The custom of scourging was diffused in every century, in the classical world and in the medieval and contemporary one as well. It was not a prerogative of the Roman time. but the witness of the sources allows confirming the compatibility among the marks on the shroud and the context of the tortures which were inflicted in the time and in the places where Jesus of Nazareth lived and underwent the harder proof for the human salvation. Thank you very much.